Hello, universe. So the first thing I should check on is I should make sure that you can hear this. So this is my brand new microphone. Say hello to the universe microphone, universe, etc. So if you're watching this, please let me know if you can't hear me. It's worked well in test runs, but if something works well when you test it, it will probably work poorly under field conditions because that is part of how the universe works. My name is Jeff Mack, Dark Lord. In terms of Dark Lord of what precisely, that really depends on whom you ask. And I was so busy making sure that my hair would not be too wet for my brand new hat. Check it out. It's a hat. This is a hat by Bard and Jester. Good heavens. That I did not, in fact, have time to put on my cloak. So I'm going to see if I can put on my cloak while I'm talking to you and explaining to you what we'll be doing here. One moment. Hello, Mr. Jordan. How are you, sir? So what this series is, well, actually, let's back that up a moment. If you're not familiar with Peter's Evil Overlord List, well, you should be, but it's a nerd thing from the before times, and it's simply a listing of lots of terrible mistakes that evil overlords can make. And it came out quite some time ago. And so there's a lot of terribly inaccurate information, and I wanted to do a series where I would teach people about some of why this stuff is ridiculous. Now, you might say, Jeff, evil overlords are already ridiculous. Why are you going to talk about the ridiculousness of evil overlords in the ridiculous genre? To which I would say, come on, don't you want a little more weirdness in your life? But more seriously, I think that today's Dark Lord, today's horrible supervillain, needs more reasons to have critical thought. It's good to plan ahead. It's good to know about what other people feel a villain should or should not do. It's also good in retrospect for me to take a shoji screen and have it cover the actual desk, but too late for that. If you want to check this out, the easiest place to get this is eviloverlord.com. It's not a commercial website. In fact, it is a very old website. In fact, it is so old that something I should have done before. Everyone, stay tuned while I just make sure that eviloverlord.com actually works. Otherwise, it'll have to be eviloverlord.com/list/something else. Oh, yes, it works. All right. Yes, you can find this at eviloverlord.com. The Evil Overlord list grew out of the exchange on what is now the Star Trek mailing list Shields Up at Spies.com beginning in 1994. Yes, for those of you of younger generations, there was a 1994. There was even a 1992. 1993 does not exist. My original conception for how I would talk about these things was that I would sort of take a random one every time, but that turned out to be something that had too much note-taking, not in the sense of I was originally thinking I would look at the list and just pick a new thing, but I've decided to do them in order, but I have not thought out what I'm going to say. So bear with me. This is going to be a set of original thoughts. I will now, 1 second, I will finally use appropriate branding. So if you don't know the stuff that I do, we put on Evil Expo, the world's greatest place in the universe to be a villain. And we also, I'm also an author. But I think this is the moment for me to begin explaining the piece of the Evil Overlord list that I'm going to tackle right now. And that is going to be, ahem, the artifact which is the source of my power. I'm quoting, this is number 5. The artifact which is the source of my power will not be kept on the mountain of despair beyond the river of fire, guarded by the dragons of eternity. It will be in my safe deposit box. The same applies to the object, which is my one weakness. Now, this was before we had advanced internet terms like Macguffin to describe that one thing that, for reasons basically inexplicable, could bring down an otherwise apparently invincible Dark Lord villain. I would say the kryptonite, but there's so much to be said about kryptonite. That's another story. All right. So what the list is getting at here, is they're saying, don't be ridiculous. Don't keep it in that ridiculous place. How will you ever gain access to it? Or even if you have easy access to it, people will get pretty suspicious and eventually everybody will know. And why are you going to that huge amount of trouble when you could just use a bank vault? These are some of the reasons that I think people might object. I consider these all to be terrible reasons, to be perfectly honest. So let's go with a couple of the things about your MacGuffin, about the thing that powers you. So let's say, I was a creature of Russian folktale, as opposed to being a creature of Austria-Hungarian folktale, which is what I actually am, werewolf, technically. If I were some sort of creature and I kept my soul in some other place so that if you killed my body, I would still come back to life. That's almost a spoiler for the new Star Wars now that I think about it, but we'll get to... No, wait, we totally will not get to that today. All right. Or I have, there is a sword, one sword, whether it's broken or not, which could destroy me. Or there is, I don't know, a key to my castle or something of that nature. Obviously, the most famous one would be the One Ring. Although, obviously, the One Ring was not hidden by Sauron in some out-of-the-way place. It was, I know that you've probably all read The Hobbit and or seen Lord of the Rings, but I'm still not going to spoil that one for you. If you haven't yet, you deserve the pleasure of finding it out for yourself. All right, Bank Vault. 1. Bank Vault? Bank Vault. So I have this object which is incredibly important, whether it's important because I need to keep it away from people or important because I need to keep it well guarded, but access it. I put it in a bank vault. So I only have access to, say, my soul from the hours of 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, not on weekends. I put it in a bank. Under what name? Under a real name? So I'm telling this bank my real name and hiding my soul there in the assumption that this will never bounce back against me, or under a pseudonym then? Well, not a lot of banks will really let you do something under a pseudonym unless it's a very convincing pseudonym and you've got very convincing false documents. And you run into sort of the problem that you would hit, which is, well, if you can fake them out with false documents, surely someone else could fake them out with false documents too. That seems like a pretty low barrier. Can you get a fake driver's license and, I don't know, a fake passport in a person's name? Yes, I imagine that you can. And that's all it takes for someone to get your soul? They don't have to fight a giant. They don't have to learn to harness the power within themselves? That's insane. That's ridiculous. Okay, well, what if it's a bank vault that you could easily break into any time, and you're just putting it there for some protection? Well, silly. If you can break in, then the heroes probably can break in. If you are so capable of breaking into a bank vault, you feel confident you can get in anytime you want to, day or night, people there, people not there. In a world where the heroes are not capable of looking at a bank vault, then honestly, you're really overestimating the heroes when you think that you need to put it in some sort of safe deposit box. You could just as well have a hidden room in your own palace. There's no reason that would be any particularly less safe, and your own palace would be crawling with your own people / beings / automata / zombies. Right. Well, what about anonymity? There's lots of banks. Granted, there are relatively few banks that will give you a safe deposit box with minimal ID and such, but tons and tons of banks. So the idea is that they'd have to search lots of banks. Well, I guess that depends a little on the geography of your world. Are there tons of giant mountains of fire in your world, or is there just like one? And if there are lots of them, okay, then maybe all of them have some good potential for hiding stuff, but also unless people live in a world that's just anti-terraformed, they're probably kind of used to mountains of fire if there's a bunch of them. If there's only one, then it's probably where you're going to hide your stuff. And you really are making a decision not necessarily about whether or not it's a good hiding place, but about whether or not it is too difficult. Remember the basic rule of being an evil overlord and figuring out what you should do based on what other people do. We hear the 1%, 0.5%, the tiny fraction of stories about heroes who overcame all the challenges. And just as authors don't necessarily always talk about it when a character needs to, I don't know, get a drink from a water fountain or something. They may not talk about the mounds of dead bodies of other adventurers that they have to step over because so many people have tried this quest and failed. The whole idea is that it is a difficult quest, right? So the idea that just because one adventurer succeeds at doing something nearly impossible, it doesn't mean you cross nearly impossible things off your list. It just means that you try to find a better author, or an author who is more sympathetic to villains, someone who is a villain punk. I was not actually trying to lead into a link to my books, but you can find my books over there if you want, or you can find me at jeffmacwrites.com. I'm going to check and see if there's any new comments. Hello, Sandra. So, where would I hide this incredibly important part of myself if I was the sort of evil overlord who had some super destructive object? I'd probably hide it on my person. I realize that the idea of like having your heart somewhere that is not you makes it difficult for someone to slay you by sticking a sword into you, but you should already be on top of the job of making it difficult for people to slay you by sticking swords in you. Live in a castle, have a moat, have a bunch of guards, have moat monsters, have anti-telepathy, anti-teleportation devices, have security cameras, have trusted guards, have moving walls, have lots of traps, and have your own personal power, your own personal magical weapons, your own personal laser rifles. Basically, if you really have something that important, I'm not exactly sure why it's a really good idea to put it somewhere else. I mean, if you're just like hiding, if you're like pretending to be the village hedge wizard, and it's unlikely that anyone's going to come after you, then maybe it makes sense. But then if no one's likely to come after you, then the people who do come after you will probably be pretty weak, and you'll probably be able to take them out. Now, Chelsea, who is an authority on these things, says, hide it in a cobbler shop among all the other souls. And that is a terrible pun, Chelsea. And that brings us to the idea of, well, you could hide it in plain sight. You could hide it like in a grain, you could pretend you could make it into something that looks like a grain of sand and put it in a desert. And someone would have to go through the whole desert. But every time we do stuff like that, some clever monkey figures out how to make the one piece of sand stand out. Now, I'll be doing a lot of these videos, and I think about 15 minutes is good. So I'm going to give a couple of minutes for people to ask questions, and then I will go over my personal way of doing it. My personal way of doing it is to find someone who travels the galaxy in a semi-random way in a broken transportation device, and who is sharp-minded but also absent-minded, and hide your thing, your soul, your weapon, etc., in some sort of object that looks like some fascinating junk that is the artifact of a lost civilization. Trust me, Doctor Who goes nuts for that stuff. He puts tons and tons of it in various parts of the TARDIS, and even he usually can't figure out where it is. So your stuff will be in a moving target, protected by Doctor Who, in an unknown part of time and space, in an unknown part of the TARDIS, in an unknown collection of art and or old junk or whatever else it is. Mark Britton brings up the excellent idea that if we're going for protection, an alternate dimension that only you have access to would be pretty good. I do agree with that, but you can be a little bit too confident that you are the only person who has access to a given dimension. Dimensions are tricky things. They sort of slip. Check out the Authority's book, Sliding Albion, for some thoughts on that. No, I'd say, personally, hide in the TARDIS. Sure, you do run into the danger that eventually the Doctor will figure out what the Doctor has that is yours and do something with it, but let's face it, if you're actually going up against Doctor Who, I wouldn't advise keeping your soul in some tricky place or doing other tricky things. He's incredibly clever. Don't go for clever, go for overwhelming force. He'll probably still do something clever, but that's okay. The Doctor is secretly a villain. The Doctor is secretly a villain. And so it's okay if they win. Finally, I'd like to mention thank you. I haven't done one of these videos in forever. Let me know if you'd like more commentary, if you'd like them to be longer, if you'd like them to be shorter. Let me know if you want more practical advice. Let me know what you would like. And I say that not just to get more Facebook or YouTube engagement, although please, certainly give me the Facebook or the YouTube engagement. I will gladly have it. But because I actually am going to be doing this on a fairly regular basis, and I would love to do more things that you enjoy, because you are not the people whom I wish to make miserable. The armies of good are those whom I wish to make miserable, and I make them good simply by existing. We have one last comment from Mr. Jordan. What about the car from Back to the Future and hide the car? You know, why don't you, the audience, try that out? Get that DeLorean, hide it in the DeLorean, hide the DeLorean, and see how that works for you, and let us know. I'm supposed to tell you to like, subscribe, share, etc., but I'm just going to tell you, stay villainous, be a monster. I am Jeff Mack, and I will talk to you soon.